Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhanaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vitvi Shavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, or with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. Jayanti Mangala Kali Bhadra Kali Kapalini Durga Kshama Shive Datri Swaha Swada Namostate. Jaya Narayani Namostate, Jaya Narayani Namostate, Jaya Narayani Namostate. Hail and victory to Mother Kali, gentle Kali who bears the skull and the sword of non-dual wisdom, compassionate one who is the primordial power. We sacrifice ourselves and bow to thee. Jai Narayani Namostate, Jai Narayani Namostate, Jai Narayani Namostate. So welcome everyone on the lead up to Kali Puja and Diwali also. Today we're going to take up two verses, but we're not going to complete them. We're going to take up verses 7 and 8 of the Encomium, 58 verses on the excellence of, in praise of the excellence of spiritual practice. And I thought that it's been a while since we went back and reviewed the orientation of what this series of 58 verses is about. So let me just remind us of what Babaji had in mind in bringing together all these different systems from the Sanatana Dharma and its purpose in, striving for spirituality. We often think of being spiritual as something quite, well, here in the West, it might be, oh, well, I practice meditation, or, oh, I light candles and I burn incense and I go to yoga and I do all these things. But spirituality, as it's presented in India, is extremely deep, as it's presented through Tantra, through Vedanta, through yoga. Spirituality is really not going outward, but completely coming inward. And as we'll see in a few minutes, there's in Tantra this teaching around the outer current and the return current, the outward current and the return current. And spirituality really comes when we make that decision to turn everything inward to the source of existence, however we envision that. So here's what Babaji summarized about this whole set of 58 verses. He says that, and this is the Sanatana Dharma, so it's a generalization and summary. Existence, there is the existence of an ultimate truth that holds within it the eternal principles of existence. So there's one ultimate reality, and it has within it the potential and therefore the seeds of all the eternal principles of existence. And so we're not only talking about time and space and the five elements and the law of causation, we're also talking about such high principles as Ishvara, as form and formlessness, as the cosmic mind, and so forth. All these things that give rise to the evolution out of the universe. Now, there is also then a resistant force, and this is something that conceals, and it's variously called Maya or ignorance or egotism or tamas, the concealing power. I would say in Christianity, it's original sin. Comes off, depending upon who you're reading, it begins to sound quite a bit like Maya. And so this impedes one's perception of this truth, this ultimate reality, and mystically obscures its all pervasive nature. And then the third point is that there's always the presence of methods that are prescribed the world over and across time that are effective in ridding the mental faculty of this chimerical or insubstantial imposition. So this reality, the seers will say something like, um, who can obscure the truth? Who can keep a blazing fire caught in a cotton cloth, tied up in a cotton cloth? This truth is so obvious to them. But for us, because they've transcended that impeding force. And so that's what we're supposed to do. And what have the seers given us? They've given us a plethora of different methods from all the different traditions and schools. And then what happens when we employ this and we transcend, we rise up in consciousness, in awareness, bit by bit. What happens is that inherent qualities that were always there within us naturally and spontaneously come forth when we engage in these purificatory disciplines. So in conclusion, then, he also says, it's essential then for beings to accept karma, the relative law of karma, because that puts the control for this transcendence, this rising above all the obstacles in our way, to accept karma, to accept reincarnation of the individualized soul, and discover the unchanging divine soul. And in doing this, we are to engage in discernment, viveka and vairagya, discrimination between what's eternal and what's non-eternal, and detachment from what's non-eternal. And so there's this beautiful quote. What was needed all along was to lift the curtain of Maya from in front of the face of truth, using the irrepressible powers existing in the self. All this power is there inside of us. It's one of the beautiful, that's an inadequate word. It's one of the things that Swami Vivekananda points out again and again. All power is within us. So what was needed all along was simply to lift the curtain of Maya from in front of the face of truth, using the irrepressible powers existing in the self. Then this world is seen as a relative but admissible reflection of reality, an expression of ecstasy, but only a simulation of the original. Okay, so let's take a look. I'm going to share my screen now at some of the verses that we've been looking at. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was reading through them in preparation for this class is that, we get into the class and of course, this is my doing. I'm plugged into all the different enumerated systems that are listed here. So we get these teachings out of the different schools of thought and the different darshanas, and we focus in on that. But there are these connecting phrases, things like wondering at the nature of these worlds and their offshoots. I came to know of the three eternal gateways. So wondering at the nature, this is referring us to the verse before and preparing us for the verse coming so that we don't forget what we learned before. The next one, coming to know of people's attachment to lower knowledge, because that's what was discussed in verse 4. Coming to know of people's attachment to lower knowledge, I perceived two types of ego, and therefore seeking maturity, I plunged into the two great philosophical streams. Okay, so these connecting words are to show us that there is a thread between each one of these systems. Some of them are what the obstacles are, and some of them are what the solutions are. And then, but these connecting words are to connect us. Moving about in wonder, the threefold miseries next revealed their various pitfalls to me. Okay, and so then that's when we studied the ultracosmic trinity, and we learned the beautiful relationship between devotional practices and intimacy with the divine within. And I always remember Lex writing to me in a letter where he said that the secret of spirituality is intimacy with the divine. So these devotional practices, they cultivate that. So then here we come now to the 7th verse. This vision, okay, the threefold miseries that revealed the various pitfalls of relative existence, as well as learning by performing the three alluring offerings, seeing the ultracosmic trinity of Ishvara, Avatar, and Ishtam. This vision opened new eyes, and I looked at humanity and saw the four conditions of embodied beings. Compassionately noting all who suffer, I gratefully perceived the four kinds of virtuous aspirants and joined them. So this is what we're going to take up today, but we're going to read on a little bit ahead. Shortly thereafter, I met my incomparable guru, who described to me the three designations of aspirants, conferring upon me the three necessary prerequisites for spiritual life. He established me formally in the sacred path. So we're going to only do part of 8 and combine it with 7. Those three designations of aspirants, which comes out of the Tantra tradition, the Tantra schools. And we're going to look at all of that and save Guru and the three necessary prerequisites for spiritual life, and this being formally established in the sacred path. We're going to save that for 2 weeks from now and focus in on the four conditions of embodied beings. So one of the things, as I was preparing for class, one of the things also that occurred to me, that in these four conditions of embodied beings, which we're going to see them, but basically they're Jiva, Jiva Koti, Jivan Mukta, and Ishvara Koti. Those are the four conditions cited in this particular listing. And then the four kinds of virtuous aspirants, which is something that Anurag took us through back when we were studying in the Gita, chapter 7. And so those are the devotees who are seeking, relief. They're in distress. They are seeking knowledge. They're seeking wealth. And then there are the wise. And so there's 4 of them. And then these 3 designations of aspirants out of the tantric view, which have to do with those who still have, and mind you, these are aspirants, they still have animalistic tendencies. Those are the pashu, and then there's the virya, who are of heroic temperament, and then the divya, the divine. And so as I was looking at all these 3 different systems, I was thinking that so much of what characterizes them is is the presence of desire in them at different levels, and then maybe the beginning of transcendence of desire, and then desire, the absence of desire. And that's kind of like a thread running through all of those systems. So my plan for this class has been to go through those three systems and then take up the chart, the 9 ways of dealing with desire. So here's the first set. So the jiva is the embodied soul bound in Maya, who is body bound. They take the body to be the self. Coming at this from the standpoint of yoga, they're under the control of the 5 kleshas. So ignorance of their true nature is there. And because of that, there is this sense of I, me, and mine, which we call ahamkara, or egotism, or egoism in English. This gives rise to attachment and aversion, which means there's desire there, and desire and aversion. And then it leads to clinging to life. So this is the condition of the jiva. The jiva is really the Atman, and sometimes we'll hear the term jivatman, because that is the nature of the self. The I of the jiva is the I of the Atman, which is the awareness, the all-pervasive awareness that is Brahman. And of course, we know in Vedanta that the conclusion is that the Atman and Brahman are one. But in this case, where we've listed the jiva doesn't know this. They are completely mistaking the body to be the self. Now, this second word, I didn't find very much on it, other than a definition. But jivakoti is considered the emancipated soul. And why do we say koti? If we're familiar with that term, Ishvara koti, we know that the word koti here has the meaning of being a part or an emanation of Ishvara. But when I asked Babaji, well, we don't want to be an emanation of Jiva, do we? He said, no, in this particular case, this means that it's still leaning towards its jivahood, its state of individuality. And so in this we can see then what the difference is between jivakoti and a jivan mukta. A jivan mukta is a living, liberated soul. They no longer fall prey to this idea of being an individual. They use the body, they use the mind, they use the ego, but they are never used by any of those things. They're established in this one all embracing consciousness. So that's what makes them a living, liberated soul. But this jivakoti, I guess perhaps we could say that this is the soul that's waking up. Now, we've heard many times that somebody asked Buddha, well, because Buddha said there are the awake and there are asleep. And somebody said, well, isn't there somebody who's waking up? He says, no, they're either awake or asleep. They just haven't, if the being awake, they just haven't yet fully realized it. So I may have butchered that anecdote, but the point here is that this soul is emancipated. Maybe they've taken initiation, and so Guru Shakti is on them. The power of the lineage has now been invested in them as a seed. So their emancipation is assured, and they're just waking up to it. So, yeah, they're still in the stage of remembrance. But yeah, so then we have these 4, and I went looking for some things that Sri Ramakrishna had to say about Ishvara Koti, because he talks about it a lot. That's a term that comes up a lot in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And in the Divine Realm, I found this statement. So this is by Swami Apurvananda, who was an attendant of Swami Shivananda of the Ramakrishna order, who was the second president of the order. He said, as analyzed by the master, Sri Ramakrishna, there were different kinds of beings. Among his devotees, there were different kinds of illumined beings. There were the Ishvara Kotis. There were the ever free. Those are called Nityasiddhas. There were embodiments of rishis, and there were emanations of different gods and goddesses. Sri Ramakrishna said this about some of his intimate companions. Narendra, Bhavanath, Rakal. Okay, so this is Swami Vivekananda, Bhavanath, I think that's Swami Premananda, and then Rakal, Swami Brahmananda. They're ever free. They are Nitya Siddhas, ever free. They have outgrown spiritual disciplines. And he means that even in previous lives. And even though they still practice them, that signifies that they did not need to strive for their own liberation. They underwent austerities purely for the benefit of humanity. And then later in the book, when Swami Shivanandaji is quite elderly and Swami Brahmananda is long past, he says something that's very fascinating. So this was stated during a birthday celebration of Swami Brahmananda, who was the first president of the order and was considered, well, he'll say this. So with his palms joined together, he said, "Glory to Maharaj," and that's Swami Brahmananda. "Maharaj, please make these boys, the monks of the order, fit for carrying on the master's work." Then facing me, he said, "Maharaj was the master's spiritual son, an Ishvara Koti. The master has graciously made me an Ishvara Koti too." So, here I'm going to engage in a little speculation. But does this suggest that he wasn't an Ishvara Koti until that particular lifetime? Or not? Does this give the possibility that through supreme devotion to Ishvara and supreme love of the fact that it takes embodiment as avatar, it takes embodiment and becomes an incarnation of God, and that supreme love for that would then connect one so that one, as I've heard, I think Babaji talk about, you become somebody who follows the Avatara Vada, who comes into embodiment with the divine incarnation of the age, whatever age that is, and sports with them and becomes closer and closer. So it just raises an interesting idea of whether Ishvara Kotis can be made or if they just already exist. It's an interesting thought. So now let's take a look at the 4 kinds of virtuous aspirants. And so, as we said, the artaha is the one who's in distress. Now, we all have these times in our life where we're challenged by Maya, challenged by karmas, etc., challenged in relationships. All of these things kind of run together, Maya, karma. And so we appeal to God. And there's a beautiful verse translated out of the popular devotional hymn called Jaya Jagadish Hare. I always think of it, and I think of it in tandem with Holy Mother's talking to her devotees who are householders and assuring them that, yes, you have problems. Well, who else are you going to take it to? Take it to Sri Ramakrishna and pour your heart out to him. He will bring you solace. He is our all in all. And that's exactly what this verse is saying. Thou art my father, thou my mother, thou my all in all. To whom else can I turn to for refuge? Who else could so easily dispel all my troubles? There is no one else outside of thee whom I can confide in. Victory to the blessed Lord of the worlds. So, yeah, we want to cultivate that feeling, that certainty, that knowledge that God is all in all and the only one we can call our own. So then the same with the knowledge seekers. They're seeking wisdom. They're seeking the highest truth. Maybe they're seeking relative knowledge to help them in their life. But who are they seeking it from? They are seeking it from God. This is what makes them virtuous aspirants. And then there's the atarti, prosperity seekers. Now, some of these prosperity seekers are just trying to hold life and family and limb together. But others maybe have in mind being uh, a hub for the distribution of wealth for good causes. So there are some like that too. Mathur Babu was a little bit like that with Shram Krishna. He had control over Rani Rasmani's financial realm, and just gave him whatever was needed in his spiritual practice, and and if he wanted all different kinds of devotees to be fed, Mathur saw to that. Um, and then there's the wise, the Gyani, the wise. Those are the ones who no longer have desire for anything. Uh, yeah. So let me read. I think I had some quotes about this. So the thing that really establishes the difference between the Gyani, the wise one, is that they have no other desire in mind. Their whole mind goes to God. And so Sri Krishna says, as we recall in the Bhagavad Gita, that these others are all wonderful, but he considers the wise his very self. And then, and sort of differentiating the difference between the first three and the last one, he says, although all of these are virtuous aspirants, and of course, God always loves the devotees, he says that, their discrimination is a bit lacking. And so they're seeking finite ends. And so they will have finite results. But the Lord himself, he goes on to say, I alone am the one who's ordaining the distribution and the giving of the boons that they are seeking. And they may be, and most of the time are, seeking this from lesser deities who are only powers and lesser emanations of the Lord. But he makes their faith strong. So when we look at these four, we also see the workings of the four the four fruits of life. That there is dharma. All of these are following dharma, and then in following dharma, they are getting uh, they're getting right livelihood, and they're getting their righteous desires satisfied. And then finally, there is liberation, as we see in the wise. So this is a step-by-step progression. And that brings back, when we were looking at the verses themselves, we see that in this verse 7, he says, compassionately noting all who suffer, I gratefully perceived the four kinds of virtuous aspirants and joined them. So, yeah, and he's joining them not only to make sure that he makes that completion of the four fruits of life and winds up in moksha, the fourth one, but also is able to turn around and help. Like Holy Mother said, your realization, your illumination is assured, being my child. Now turn around and help the others make their way. Okay, so moving on, let's take a look at the 3 designations of aspirants. So the first one, let's look at it again in context to the verse. Okay. So he meets his guru, who describes to him the 3 designations of aspirants. Now, this is a really important thing because the kinds of spiritual practices that one's teacher gives to any particular disciple is going to depend upon what level of aspirant, what one's temperament is, what one's capacity is. So Tantra then lays these 3 out. So there's the pashu, the animalistic, and this kind of being moves along that outgoing current. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but just know that it's outward going and earns merit and demerit from their worldly activities. This kind of devotee and disciple is still holding out in sort of a conventional mode. They haven't cut the 3 knots of hate, fear, shame, and is still swayed by passions and is a slave of lust, greed, pride, anger, delusion, envy, etc. So these are still going on. And you might recall, those of you who have been attending this series, that there was, we talked about the 3 eternal gateways. And we know that there is conventional religion. And in the conventional religion, one is, is following just morals and ethics. And there's still this sense of there's our group and there's your group, and our group is better than your group. And it's kind of fundamentalism that can go on also. So this kind of pashu devotee might partake of that kind of conventional religion and way of looking at things. May still be a little bit tribal. And so when they are given spiritual practices, part of their practice is most likely going to be shying away from temptations, not putting themselves in the atmosphere, in the region of things that are going to excite desire, excite aversion, excite, the passions of hate, anger, lust, greed, etc. So then there's the heroic disciple. This kind of being, this kind of aspirant has inner strength and is therefore permitted to practice the sublimation of desire. In this case, it's a bit like fighting fire with fire. And this is what's said about the virachara. They are established in complete self-control. This being does not forget themselves in the most trying or tempting circumstances. They are of fearless disposition, pure in motive, gentle in speech, strong in body, resourceful, courageous, intelligent, adventurous, humble, and cherishes only what is good. So this kind of disciple, this kind of aspirant is of the highest quality, well, not the highest, but of great quality for performing sadhana. And I venture to say that a teacher is grateful to receive viracharas. And then the final one is divyachara. This is the divine, the daiva. And this being has risen above all bonds of desire and has no desire left even to sublimate. Nothing is left for sublimation. And by the way, I'm taking this out of an essay or an article on Tantra that appears in the abridged version of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. So I've just kind of summarized a few things. Anyway, he says one of the tantric scriptures describes such an aspirant as sparing in speech, beloved of all, introspective, steady, sagacious, and solicitous about others' welfare. They never swerve from the path of truth and can do no evil. I hear Sri Ramakrishna saying, they never make a false step. They are good in every way and are regarded as the embodiment of Shiva. This kind of being doesn't need physical aids for rousing spiritual emotions. The meditative mood is spontaneous in them. They are always in ecstasy, even if it's very subtle one, kind of below radar, but they are always in ecstasy. And instead of the 5 ingredients that are used in the what's called the Vamachara, that are used by the hero, he substitutes consciousness, bliss, and exaltation, chit, ananda, and bhava. So when I said that the Pashvachara, the Pashu, the animalistic aspirant, mustn't engage with temptations, there is an aspect of Tantra that has a very, very bad name. And in its original inception, that path was taught by highly qualified and authentic teachers who could transmit these teachings. And I've heard it said that there really aren't any of those left. And Sri Ramakrishna, back in the 1800s, did not want to see any of his disciples following that path, but he acknowledged it as a path. But in any case, the ingredients for the heroic devotee included things like grains, fish, meat, wine, and sexual union. All of these are temptations. They excite the desires, and one can fall off the path easily in trying to practice sublimation with these, unless one has a highly qualified teacher. So all of that has to be said, but this is what we mean by, when they say that the heroic aspirant is established in complete self-control. Okay. So imagine having complete self-control to the point where in imbibing and having experience with any of these things, one is not exciting the passions, but having a vision of God. Okay. So it takes an extreme power to be able to do those things. But the Divyachara, the divine aspirant, on the other hand, has absolutely no desire for any of those things. And instead of engaging them, they substitute consciousness, bliss, and exaltation instead. And so here we can sort of think about Sri Ramakrishna. And he had already had illumination before the Bhairavi Brahmani came to him. But he had done it all on his own. And so she was his first teacher. And part of her place in his divine sport was showing him that all of his divine experiences were corroborated in the scriptures and in the path. And so by way of doing that, she took him through all the different practices of Tantra. But when it came to, I think meats included, meat, wine, and sexual union, he would not do those. And so instead, he merely touched his finger to the wine. And that was all he needed to have the end result. And he went into samadhi. He only had to see the sexual union taking place in 2 people, and he went into samadhi. So that's a divya aspirant. So let's take a look at that outgoing current versus the return current. And I'm just going to go through it. I'm just going to read this because I want to make sure we get to that chart. So in the Tantra, and there's different schools, so it might be said in different ways, but it says that in every jiva center, okay, so we have Paramashiva and it projects through the power of Shakti, Mahashakti, Mahamaya, or the different aparigraha Shaktis, and I think Babaji is going to be talking about that this Sunday, that the universe gets projected, but it's only Paramashiva that is the reality behind all of it. So, but we do end up with these jiva centers. So in every jiva center, there are elements of both individuality, okay, that's limitation, and infinitude, that's Paramashiva, phenomenality and reality. One direction of the functioning Maya, called the outgoing current, creates the jiva center with its limitations or fetters. And a reversal of this direction is called the return current, and it reveals the infinite. Sound like what we do in our practices, dissolving the mind stream through the different ways, through the 24 cosmic principles, through the 3 bodies, through the 5 koshas. This is doing the reverse. This is the return current, and it reveals the infinite. Tantra shows the way to change the outgoing current into the return current. That's the purposes of the different practices in Tantra. And, those devotional practices are part of that too. Tantra shows the way to change the outgoing current into the return current, transforming what operates as a bond for the Shiva into a releaser or liberator. As the Tantra says, one must rise by that by which one falls. The very poison that kills becomes the elixir of life when used by the wise. That statement reminds me of the story of Shiva drinking the poison that the gods and the demons churned up in the milk ocean, trying to get all their desires satisfied by different objects. And this poison comes out from that process, and it threatens the whole universe. And Shiva just takes it and he drinks it and transforms it into nectar. So he's kind of the ideal for that. Okay, so now we've gotten a view of all of these different kinds of grades of beings from different angles. Now let's take a look at what this is like in our lives, and let's say our lifetimes, because everyone here has probably shifted out of Maya's twin wheel of transmigration and shifted into Mahamaya's twin wheel of transformation. So, and notice in the way that this chart of Babaji's is laid out, and maybe somebody can give us a page number in footfalls for this, that there, and the chart itself is called The 9 Ways of Dealing with Desire. And the inferior modes are down here, and they're connected with the wheel of transmigration. And the superior modes are in the upper section, connected to the wheel of transformation, the 2 wheels of transformation. So enjoying desire, satisfying desire, trying to satiate desire, let's just, because we don't have that much time, let's just call that all under the heading of pouring gasoline to put out a fire. Okay? If one has not stepped foot on the path of Dharma, if one has not seen that the goal of human existence is the realization of Atman and Brahman are one, or the realization of the identity of the jiva as Shiva, or if one wants to keep the distinction there, realized that one is a child of the Lord and Mother of the universe. So before one realizes that that's the goal, then just enjoying desire and not thinking about God is just creating karma and strengthening that wheel of transmigration. So what does it look like? So what we have here first is we're born in ignorance because we didn't do any real spiritual practice in prior lifetimes. So this ignorance of our true self giving rise to the rest of the kleshas that we talked about earlier. And that means that we grow up in selfishness. We live life in delusion, thinking that everything out there, outside of us, including our body, still that outer, the outer of the inner, all of that is real. All of that can give us satisfaction. And we try and fulfill ourselves and, and consistently fail. Uh, we don't realize that you can't have happiness without sorrow. And so we die in doubt and fear. And this just continues until we enter into moral life. Maybe we get introduced by someone into um, into conventional religion, into basic religion, and we start getting our moral and ethical life together. That's great. So we're here in conventional religion, and we observe ethics, and we uh, just live a mundane, habitual life. Those of us, and this sounds very judgmental. I don't mean it. Let's call it discernment. Okay. So there are the devotees who know that God is important and God has created them, and God has created the world, and God has created it. And there are those who believe this merely for our enjoyment. It's here for our enjoyment. And we're to be good and kind to each other. And that's the way we live our life. But we may not, in that stage, ever have a direct experience of God within us. So what do we have? We're okay, we're good, we're moral, we're ethical, but we're just floating between rajas and tamas and sattva, just in cycles. And so we have this attachment to pleasure and we give into it. And then that leads to rajas, and then too much rajas in trying to satisfy our desires, then just, um, we overwhelm the senses, and karma comes due, and we land in tamas, and then we just cycle through. So this attachment to pleasure that we have does lead us to birth in heaven, and this moral and ethical life leads us birth in heaven and on earth. And we just go round and round and round. We try to be good, but we're trying to be good in order to get good. And it's just like treating God and religion like Santa Claus. So that's not going to get us anywhere ultimately. And that's what the rishis saw. So now in the last 10 minutes, let's take a look at these Mahamaya's twin wheel of transformation. So I remember once Babaji was sharing this chart, and I think maybe it was at the women's prison where he was sharing it. And somebody said, how do we shift from the lower wheel to the upper wheel? And Babaji said, it's through yearning. And that's almost like a direct quote out of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna said that yearning is like the red sky at dawn. As soon as you see the red at dawn, you know that the sun of wisdom is going to rise. And so that yearning, a sincere yearning for God, then shifts one. And so here we are. We have this yearning, and that leads us, we're no longer satisfied with conventional religion, because conventional religion maybe was more about faith and belief. but now you want method. And so you begin to take vows and precepts and you engage in this dharmic life. You had uh, a conventional religious life before, a moral and ethical life. But what Dharma gives us is the route to ultimate freedom. So that's the distinction there. It's going to include all those morals and ethics, but now we've got added in this pathway towards liberation. And so we get that desire for freedom. And when we have this sincere desire for freedom, mumukshutvam, as it's said in Vedanta, then we shift over and we attain path and guru. And this is why we're saving that for next week, because that shows up in verse 8. And we get our initial practices. Before we were practicing meditation, maybe out of a book, or because our friends were telling us about it. But now we have an adept in our life. We have our eternal friend here in form as the guru, giving us practices. And when the teacher, an authentic teacher, gives us the practice, we not only get it, but we also get the power to engage in it. And this is the power of God working through the guru. So we engage in the initial practices. We engage in worship and study. And this is these are the two wings of the bird, right? Devotion and wisdom. And we need that wisdom to open our minds, to purify our minds of false understanding. And then this worship sweetens it and getting rid of, purifying the mind of false understanding, misunderstandings, false perceptions, then makes our worship even sweeter because there's more clarity there, more purity, more sincerity, because we know what we're after. And then we begin to practice deeper and deeper meditation. We begin, whether we're following the Yoga Sutras in detail or not, the power of concentration is starting to come to us. There's no meditation before concentration, but isn't that what worship and study was giving us? Was this ability to concentrate both on the word and on the deity. And now we're in meditation and we're beginning to get direct perception. And so we cycle through this, deepening and deepening it. Think of it as one of I forget what it's called, but it's where you just rise up, cycling and cycling, and everything is getting deeper and deeper. And as we're doing this, we're never ever leaving behind the teacher, because when we first came to the teacher and we got our initiation and we got our initial practices, we were like so relieved and so grateful. But there are challenges along the way, and the teacher has been through those. And so it's important to keep that connection of holy company with the teacher. So eventually then, as direct perception gets clear, more frequent, etc., we begin to enter into this formless transcendence. So, yeah, let's take a look at these different ways of dealing with desire. So here we are. Before, we thought that we could fulfill desire by engaging in it. Now we are in Dharma here, and we know that the only way to fulfill desire is to do it through God, to always put the one before the zeros. Everything in life, in phenomenal existence, in our thoughts, in our emotions, etc., all of that is just phenomena. and it's not ultimately satisfying. Only God is satisfying. So if we have that as our pole star, and we put God first, then actually our desires naturally get fulfilled. We don't have to seek out. We don't have to seek for it. We don't even have to ask for it. Just like it says in the Bible somewhere, you don't need, God already knows what we need. Divine Mother, the Blessed Lord, uh, they've given us this body, this life, etc. Our prayers are already answered. We just need to wake up to it, is the way Babaji has put this. Um, okay. So then the next way of dealing with desire is to resist it. And this is through self-effort. And this self-effort means through discrimination. This discriminate, by now we know what the nature of the self is. And we know that desire keeps us going outward, but we're wanting to come inward. So we exercise resistance to that desire. And this is not a matter of repression. We are discriminating. And so this, when we truly discriminate the difference between the eternal and the non-eternal, when it's gone the full way, the full analysis has happened, then we get detachment. So, this is the beginning stage, starting to resist it and apply that discrimination. Then there's destroying desire at the root via austerity. And this initially should be done with the help of a teacher. And later on, as one truly becomes an adept and the mind itself becomes one's guru, one can engage in this. This is not going to be the way for everyone, and probably not at all for householders, which most of us are. Then there is surrendering desire via various acts of yagya and sacrifice. You can surrender desire through the practice of ritual worship. That's a very powerful way. And we talked about that last time. And then there's sublimating desire by removing the poison from passion. Again, we want the teacher. The teacher is necessary to do this, to help us know how to do this successfully so that we are not fooling ourselves. And in Tantra, this is quite a beautiful process. This sublimation has a lot to do with purification and other stages. And then there's transcending desire, using non-receptivity. You could say that this is the mature side of resisting desire, that when our resistance through the practice of discrimination and detachment has matured, then we just transcend it and we have non-receptivity. Who is it that desires anyway? The self, everything is fulfilled in the Atman. Okay, well, we've reached the end of our class. Close with a prayer. Om Asato Ma Sadgamoya, Tamaso Ma Jyotir Gamoya, Mrichor Ma Amritam Gamoya, Abhira Bhira Maeti, Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam, Tenamam Pahinicham, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth, from darkness to light, from the unreal to the real. Lead us from the illusion of death and limitation to realization of our eternal, infinite existence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us. May peace be unto all living beings. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Tat Sat. Let me turn off. I have some announcements. Let me just stop the recording.